Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Ryan the Ride Mechanic channel. How are you doing today? Today we are going to ask the question, can guests be held legally responsible for things that they do in the park? And we're also going to ask the same question, can mechanics be held legally responsible for things they do in the park? We'll find out today.
Now get ready. Here we go.
First thing, as usual, thank you for coming back and watching another video. I do appreciate it. If this is your first time here, make sure you like and subscribe and follow me for more content and crazy things that I do around this channel regarding rides and amusement, other things like that, the basic stuff. Today's topic we are going to talk about, it's not necessarily about ride operation, but it's something that we shouldn't take lightly either at the same time. This is about basically mechanics, management, guest responsibility in the park. There's a lot of things people don't understand, which is that you are held legally responsible for everything you do inside the park. And that is at every level for everybody. So the guests inside the park are held legally responsible for what they do. The mechanics are held legally responsible for what they do. Same with management, same with the corporation. Everybody at every level is liable for everything that happens. So there's lots of things that we do to try to protect people involved. And when you hear the speech given throughout the park and they say, well, we do this for your own safety. We say, well, why can't I bring my goblet of fire on the ride? It's like, well, we're going to do this for your safety, and then what they say, and the safety of others, right? That's an actual true statement. They are making you do that for your safety and the safety of others. So let's break this down a little bit. First, we're going to tackle the easy subject. We're going to tackle the guests legally responsible for things. Okay, so being a guest in an amusement park, you say, what am I being held legally responsible for? What do I have to do? What is this? What is that? Have you seen in the newspapers and things where someone has lost a phone, a camera, they brought something on the ride that they weren't supposed to have and it fell off and hit somebody? Well, you would like to think, well, if I brought my phone on the ride and it just fell off and hit somebody, then, well, it sucks that I lost my phone, right? And now I'm going to be mad at the park and we'll go and stomp around and demand my phone back and everyone stop what they're doing and get my phone, right? Well, that's not necessarily true because the park told you not to bring that on the ride and you did it anyway. So if your phone falls off and hits somebody in the queue line, a pathway, anything like that, that person will, if they try to sue the park, they're going to try to sue the park, but they're also going to try to sue the person whose phone that is. They're going to try to name, everyone gets named in a lawsuit. I don't know if you've ever been part of lawsuits, but everybody and their brother gets named in there. So it's not like one person in particular is safe in this ordeal. So you can extend this thought out a little bit further and apply it to just doing things off rides as well. Well, if you're messing around and you do something and you cause somebody else to be injured, well, your actions causing somebody to be injured, that person can come after you, the guest, for being injured. They're not going to go back to the park and say, well, that guest did something dumb, so it's the park's fault, and sue the park. I mean, lawyers being lawyers, yes, they will name the park in the lawsuit as well. But realistically, they're only naming the park for the big umbrella insurance policy that the park has. Not necessarily because it's the park's fault. It's because insurance typically pays out that stuff. So they're naming them for that. But realistically, the real meat and potatoes of that lawsuit is actually between the two people, not really the person and the park itself. So that's one of those examples where you still have to be careful inside of parks, and you still have to be careful what you do, because it is not only just your safety involved, it is the safety of people around you. What you do, your actions have consequences, and you could do all sorts of stuff. Let's bring up a really bad one, right? You remember a bunch of years ago, some of you probably remember, there was an instance where somebody lost their hat on a roller coaster. Yeah, some of you see where I'm going with this one, right? All right, so a person jumped a fence and then went into this ride and retrieved their hat right at the time that the roller coaster was coming. Well, this person got a fatal injury to the head and died. So that's horrible, right? We can't have stuff like that. But at the same time, the other persons, some cases on the ride, well, their legs received bone-shattering injuries and things like that. They won't be the same again after that. And that's one thing, I don't care what industry you're in, amusement, mechanical, agricultural, pharmaceutical, whatever you're in, it doesn't really matter. We should never put anybody in harm's way. It should never be a thing to send people home different than the way they came in. The point I'm trying to make here is that everyone's actions has consequences to this. I've been in a ride myself. I was riding towards the back of a train on a hyper style coaster. This was many years ago, but I remember we went up and over a bunny hill, and from the front of the train I could see this camera, like it was, one of the handheld digital cameras. I could see this camera pop up and fly right over the entire train, and then it perfectly went straight back behind everybody and then went right on my head. My head wasn't cut open. There wasn't anything wrong, That's not the reason why I am like I am today. But the point is that people were told not to bring any loose articles on that ride. That everyone was told not to do that, but that person did that. So luckily, I didn't have any major injuries from this. I just got a minor, I was like, ow, that really hurt. And that was the end of it. But it could have been a lot worse, depending on who it hits. Some people are like, well, you should be able to take this or that. It's like, play it down a little bit. What happens if this is a little kid's first ride, right? You're on some ride and it's some little kids and you lose a 1.5 pound camcorder or something like that, and it flies out, gains speed, and slams into some kid. What happens if your camcorder flies off of a ride and lands in a stroller where there's a newborn baby sitting there? You literally kill somebody with these things when they leave the ride. I mean, you have the height of the object falling mixed with the mass and acceleration of the object itself, combined with the speed that the ride was going on top of that. So you notice that I try to take most of my pictures and video for this channel. I don't like using other people's stuff just because I feel like I'm stealing it. I ask most people if I can use permission to get stuff. I try to find stuff where people say it's copyright free, go ahead and use this. I try to find stuff like that, and use that. But there's a lot of people that bring cameras on the rides to do this stuff, and I won't do that. I'm not going to bring a camera on a ride because I don't have the proper equipment to do that. I don't want to film for this channel and put other people in harm's way when I'm just trying to get a video for something. That doesn't make any sense to me at all. There are mountains and mountains and mountains of channels out there that do record on rides. And if you watch them, lots of them like to use the 360 cams and stuff like that. If you watch them, they have special mounts that they've literally strapped to their hand, to their body, something like that. Most of these mounts are, in fact, approved by amusement parks. If I were to buy one of those GoPros where it looks like a vest type deal, where the camera's sitting in the middle, and that's strapped around me, well, that's fine because it's strapped around me and it's not going to go anywhere. And then when I get in, the restraint is holding me down. So the parks look at a lot of that stuff and they actually allow that to go on there. A lot of people can go to the park before they start if they want to go out and film for the day, and they say, hey, I want to film on rides. This is my setup that I'm using to film. I don't need anything special. I'm just going to go in line with everybody and film, and I'm going to use these things. And most of the time the park will probably look at it and be like, yeah, that's fine, you can use that. If I just get there and I'm like, I'm just going to hold my phone like this while I'm riding the ride. I'm just going to hold my phone with nothing else, no other tether, no strap, no nothing. And I'm just going to ride. The park will be like, no, because there's a chance I'll let go of this. Have I done this before? To film? No. When I was a mechanic and we just were riding around on stuff just for test riding and the park wasn't open, the park was closed, I did, honestly. I did take my phone on there because I needed something to do, right? So where I'm on a major roller coaster going on this thing and the park's closed, so I'm just sitting there waiting for the next cycle. And that point in time, yeah, I was probably playing Candy Crush. Absolutely. It gets a little hard on some rides because you want to connect those 3 in a row and then you'll hit a bump and you're like, you got the wrong thing, and then you end up wasting a move off of that. That's no fun. Your scores are no good after that. I've done things like that before, but not like with the park wide open. Hey, here we go. Let's do this. So you as a guest can get named in a lawsuit. People can personally come after you for what you did at an amusement park. So that has some extra weight. Next time you see people screwing around, or if you yourself want to go screw around the park and do crazy things that might end up badly, remember that you're legally responsible for what you did. Now, this all being said, I'm going to break some news right now and be like, okay, and no one's ready for this, right? But I am not a lawyer. I know. I'll give you a minute for that to set in. I'm not a lawyer. Okay, so I'm just giving some advice the best I can. But this whole video is just going to have the general, like, hey, be careful with what you do, right? No matter what you could actually take this concept away from rides and amusement parks and apply it to other things too, right? If you drive dangerously out on the road, you're responsible for that too. If you drink and drive, you're responsible for that too. If you go out and do something dumb and end a bunch of people's lives, you're responsible for that too. So the point is that you're going to be careful here. So that's enough about the general public. Let's move on to the reason why most of us are here, which is the maintenance side of things. It's like, okay, I've said this before, like on my last video, I said, hey, when I run up a ride, I don't want to go over that other person's inspection, because I'm putting my name on the ride stating that it's good. And then there's a lot of questions. Well, wait a minute, how is this and how is that? I know there is a ton of questions around that statement. So let's look at the ride run-up example right now and just talk about that for a minute. When I go to a ride and run it up, I pull the card out of there and I look at it and it says the track and structure, trains, restraints, all this other stuff was signed off and good. Okay. So all I'm being held responsible for that day is I'm just being held responsible for the fact that I took all these components, made sure generally that they were still in a usable condition, and then I went ahead and put them into service for the day. That's what I'm being held responsible for. Now, if I put a train on there and there's an accident later on in the day, they're going to come back to me and they're going to say, you signed the write-off for the day, so you're being named in this lawsuit, which I would expect that. I would expect to be named in that lawsuit. But I'm not really going to be sweating bullets off of that, because the mechanic underneath that write-up, that the mechanic that is opening that ride, has another set of signatures underneath that for the mechanic that signed off that particular component, right? If there was a problem and the train was going around the track and it completely lost a guide wheel, the guide wheel just fell off, that mechanic who signed off the train, we're going to pry into that mechanic, and they say, hey, was everything there? How did you know everything was there? They're going to come back to me too, and they're going to ask, hey, the thing just fell off. Didn't you look to see if everything was intact? And I'm like, oh yeah, everything was intact. Well, didn't you check witness marks and alignment and this and that? And did you verify that there was 183 Newton meters on that nut that morning? It's like, no, I didn't do that. I went down and looked to make sure, does it have all its guide wheels? And I just looked down the train and I go, yep, it does. Does it have its road wheels? Yes, it does. Everything kind of looks okay? Yes, it does. And we put it into service. They're going to go back to the other mechanic and go, okay, when you PM the train, what happened there? It will open up this big legality issue when it comes to like operating rides and this and that. So mechanics like to ensure that what they do is covered. That's why on that last video I said, hey, some mechanics will spend a lot of time looking at the train again. So a lot of times what we do in those cases, we have the mechanic that did the inspection on the ride do the run-up on the ride as well. That happens the majority of time, especially with bigger major rides too. Take that out and go back to it and say, all right, I am inspecting the ride that day. I inspected everything and I said it was good, and then there was an accident on that ride that day. Accidents, when I refer to accidents, they could be major or minor, right? You can have a major headline accident, which is two trains collided, lots of people hurt. It's really bad news, right? Or you can also have an accident which is simple as a person got their hand cut. It doesn't take much. So if the person's hand got cut, they go to first aid and they report it and they say, well, I was on that ride, I got my hand cut real deep. And then first aid says, oh yeah, you're going to need to go to the hospital and get stitches. Well, at that point in time, lots of bells and whistles start going off and everyone gets notified. Because now you have, once you say, well, you've got to go external and get help, now you have a recordable injury. Recordable, by that I mean that's an OSHA thing. When you have to go outside your normal sources, that's a recordable injury. And whether it's a guest or employee, that's a bad thing. So they want to find out what happened. Why did that happen? Well, guest cut themselves on what? What did they cut themselves on? The restraint. How did they cut themselves on a restraint? And then say, well, we went around to, let's see, the restraint that they were working with, and oh, look, the handles that are on the outside of it, this one's got a big sharp burr sticking off to the side. That's like a razor blade sitting there. Well, you would go back to the inspection and say, hey, it says right here that you're supposed to check for loose, missing, damaged, or sharp objects that could catch or cut clothing, hands, anything like that. And you sign that off. So did you check that restraint? And see how it goes? So they're going to come back to the mechanic and try to figure out what happened, and they're going to do an investigation in this as well, and they have to figure out what happened to this restraint. What caused that sharp burr to appear? Because they're trying to figure out a timeline. They're trying to figure out if that sharp restraint was, they're trying to figure out a timeline They're trying to figure out if that sharp burr was on that restraint prior to the mechanic's inspection or after the mechanic's inspection. Because if it was there prior to the inspection, that means the mechanic didn't catch it, and they essentially opened up an unsafe piece of equipment. If it was there, if it happened afterwards, which we wouldn't know why, how, when, or where, but if it happened afterwards, then you can say the mechanic went there, they inspected it, they did all their normal checks, they opened it up, and sometime after it, somehow, this happened. And then the person got injured on it. That's a completely different scenario. So with this type of incident, let's look at the umbrella that we'd have in place at a typical amusement park, right? There's multiple levels to this, but you essentially have the mechanic, which is, I would say, pretty close to your end user. You have your mechanic who sits underneath the umbrella of the maintenance department, basically. There's typically like lead, supervisor, manager, director. That's the maintenance umbrella. And then that maintenance umbrella sits underneath the park umbrella that has all this other stuff happening. And then that umbrella sits underneath, in a lot of cases, it sits underneath a corporate umbrella, which houses a lot of stuff. So when lawsuits start flying, fingers start pointing. It's your problem, it's your problem, it's your problem. All the fingers start pointing at everybody else. What they're trying to do, and to really think about this structure and how it works, you have to go up bigger, because on these small little things like I was talking about, where a guest cut their hand on something, that is going to be a very, very minor thing. It's going to be a minor claim. The scale is just very small. So it won't have much interaction with the system. So if we blow it up bigger and we talk about earlier, like what we had, like a fatality on something, unfortunately, there's not a lot of shortages of those throughout rides histories of stuff. Let's see, I could think of a couple times where a person has gone in the infield and then gotten hit by a roller coaster trying to get their hat back, right? That's actually happened a lot of times. Mechanics and employees alike have been struck by roller coasters so many times. It happened a lot. And most all of them were in places they weren't supposed to be. I remember when I got hired on, a welder, I believe it was, I think it was a welder, was killed by a roller coaster. And it's like, how did that happen? Where was the welder? What was he doing? I'm thinking, oh my gosh, was he hanging off the structure and they sent the train around? What's going on? Nope. He was in an infield picking up money off the ground. Wow. Okay. Literally picking up change off the ground and was struck by a ride. That's no way to go right there. But that was before there was a lot of policies and procedures in place and a lot of extra things changed that now can prevent that from happening. But up until that time, there wasn't a lot of that stuff there. More recently, very recently, remember, what was it, a year or 2 years ago, the lady that was injured by the flag plate that came off of the Top Thrills ride. Well, she was in the queue line. So that's a very big lawsuit, and this lawsuit would hit all those umbrellas that I'm talking about. It would pretty much tap every single one of them right there. That lawsuit, that lawyer has to go in there and basically try to prove that the park was acting negligently. And that is a very tough thing to do, but the park should have plenty of documentation to stand on if they did everything right. That lawyer would have to go in and prove that the flag plate was inspected that day, that the bolts were intact, that they were the correct bolts, the correct flag plate, and they would cross-reference all this stuff with Intamin. Because the first thing they do, that flag plate that came off, they were like, hey, Intamin, is this your flag plate? It's a yes or no question. Is that your flag plate? So Intamin says, yes, that's our flag plate. And then they say, well, are these the screws that you said to hold it on with? Yes or no? Yes, those are. It's like, okay, what torque rate did you say to put those onto? What torque spec did you say to put those down to? Oh, we said to take them down to 60 Newton meters. It's like, okay. And then they would go back to the park and say, were those bolts installed at 60 Newton meters? What torque wrench did they use? When was the last time the torque wrench was calibrated? Okay. But at any point in time, if the manufacturer says no, well, that kicks it out from underneath the manufacturer. So if they say, hey, Intamin, is this your flag plate? Now, question number one, right? Is this your flag plate? And Intamin says, no, that is not our flag plate. What do you mean that's not your flag plate? Isn't that the one you supplied with the ride? No, it's not. Do you have any records or sales of supplying them with an alternate flag plate afterwards? No, we did not. Did the park ever contact you officially and say, hey, we're going to just make our own flag plate with some steel we found in the back of the shop? Nope, they did not. Okay, then that question goes to the park. Where did this flag plate come from? And then you can just boil it down from there, right? You could just keep asking questions until you boil this all the way down to the bottom. Where did the flag plate come from? That flag plate's always been there. It's like, you have pictures of it, you have NDT records of it. Like what proves that flag plate has always been there? It's like, oh, well, no, maybe we broke the flag plate, but we made another one. And then, well, okay, well, when you made another one, where is your engineering showing that flag plate was the exact same size, shape, and material as that first one? Well, material makes a difference, because I know a lot of Intamin flag plates, they're quite thin sheet metal, right? They're really thin stuff. But for some reason on this ride, they needed a really thick one. So it's like, okay, but if Intamin's like, yeah, we use 4 millimeter thick steel to make that flag plate, and the park remade the flag plate using 1/2 inch plate, right? They husked that thing, right? That's what I call it. When you make something way beefier than it needs to be, I'm like, well, you husk that thing. Because that's what I get from working on Huss rides. So it's like, okay, well, you did this. You made this much bigger. It's like, well, yeah, we were having trouble with it flagging proximity sensors, so we made it thicker. It's like, well, where's the engineering approval signing off that those 2 fasteners that held that plate on were the correct size, torque rating, everything else for that? And then engineering steps up and said, here's our stamp of approval right there. So at there, the lawsuit stops. It didn't hit the manufacturer, but it did hit the corporation. Because now you have engineers at the corporation level that put their stamp of approval on that. And they said, that's ours. We did that. We've done the calculations. Here's the math. Here's the drawings. Here's the CAD analysis, whatever it was. Everything we said this was done right. So the lawsuit bounced off the manufacturer. It hit the corporation and stopped at the engineering level. It's like, okay, let's go to the other side now. Engineers, did you make this flag plate? And they go, no, we did not. Oh, okay. So then it goes down to the park level. It's like, park level, did you guys make this flag plate? Yeah, we did. Okay. Where was your documentation stating that this was the correct way to fabricate this flag plate? Well, we don't have any, but we all put our heads together and said, okay, the 2 pretty much look identical to each other. In fact, we have pictures. Here's the old one that, who knows, was cracked, broken, ran over it with a forklift, whatever. And here is a new one that we made. Look, they're the same size, shape, and everything. It's not great, but that's something to stand on, right? It's like, okay, but you have the material specs for the old one versus the new one, weight, size and shape, but all that other stuff. It's not great, but it's still landing more on the park. It's like, okay, you guys did something, but didn't have all your ducks in a row, and now you're paying for it. But then let's, go back again and switch that. And the park says, no, we didn't do that. So then it goes to maintenance and says, hey, did you guys put a new flag plate on that thing? So the director says, no, we didn't put a new flag plate on that. And it goes to the manager. Manager, did you put a new flag plate on that thing? No, we didn't. So then it goes to the supervisor. Supervisor, did you put a new flag plate on that thing? Oh yeah, that other one broke. Okay, so when you fabricated the new flag plate, did you make it to any standard? Did you contact the manufacturer of the ride? Did you contact your engineering? Did you contact an independent engineering company? Oh no, we just went out to the back and got some steel and cut it out, drilled 2 holes in it, flag plate, we're done. So at that point in time, you can say right there that that supervisor sounds like he knows everything about what happened. It's like, this is what we did. We went out and got this and we got that. So then they would pry into that and they'd say, well, who told you to do that? Well, and if the supervisor, like myself being a supervisor, right? If I said, well, the ride kept having a lot of downtime, or the flag plate broke, whatever it might have been, right? I just said, hey, Bob, go out there, grab that material and cut it, and then put it on those trains. So, and then use the same hardware and everything, and we'll just put it on there, but we want to make this bigger so it flags better. At that point in time, that supervisor has now taken all the responsibility of everything. They failed to go to the manufacturer. They failed to go to the corporation. They failed to go to engineering. They even failed to go to their upper management at that point in time. They completely took that decision in on their own, and they did it. The consequences of that action rest solely at that one person's level. Now, you can say it does trickle down further than that, because everyone has the ability to stop something underneath that. So you can go further down and you could say Bob was the mechanic, right? He knew plenty of how to do stuff. So he said, Bob, go cut that material, make it the same thing but 10 millimeters wider, and go bolt that on the train. In each manual, it says never to use anything other than OEM supplied parts, right? So if we crack a flag plate on a ride, we can't just go make one ourselves. We have to go back to the manufacturer and purchase the flag plate that they made for that ride. No matter how dumb it is, you have to do it. So if you don't do that, you're taking on that liability, down to the smallest thing. If there is a seatbelt bolt and we replace the seatbelt bolt with a different one that the manufacturer does not specify, they're like, oh, we used a DIN 933 grade 8 bolt, and we put it back in with a DIN 931, and the bolt snapped, the belt failed, and there was an injury because of it. It's like, well, who gave you permission to change the DIN number of the bolt? Nobody? You did that on your own? Well, that's a you problem then, because you did that. And these things aren't light either. I mean, you're talking about fatalities here. You're talking about life-changing injuries and things like that. So wherever that particular lawsuit stops at the time, those people are held fully responsible for the decisions that they made. But they're bigger. They mess up more things, right? The mechanic signing off the ride in the morning time can say, well, if there was an accident later on, they can say, well, the bushings were worn out in that assembly and the assembly failed. People got injured. It's like, okay, well, why did you sign the write-off? Well, the lead told me to sign the write-off. Who's responsible now? Is it the mechanic that signed the write-off or the lead that told them to sign the write-off? This is a multiple choice question. Is it A or B? Mechanic, lead, who do you think it's going to be? Wait for you to lock in your answers down below. Okay, so the answer is actually going to be the mechanic. You say, well, wait a minute. The lead told him to sign the write-off. It's like, yes, your signature is the weapon in this case. We're going to say the pen is mightier than the sword, right? With this pen, I can put a ride into service for the day. That's what this pen can do. I can put a ride into service for the day. My name is on that line because I said it was okay. Now, if you are a mechanic and you're in this scenario, and I say, hey, this assembly's worn out, it can't operate, it's unsafe to operate, and the lead comes in and says, just sign the write-off, we need the ride to open. Here you go. You sign it off, I'm not going to. You think that's a smart move to make? It might cause some people to pause. It might not, though. So you would have to be ready to take action depending on the severity of it, right? I would hope that in the amusement industry everywhere, we are not signing off rides that are blatantly unsafe, right? I would hope that we're not doing that at any level. But at the same time, if you're in charge of getting something done and you say this isn't safe, and they say, well, we want to open it anyway, and you go, this is going to hurt somebody if this operates like this. It's like, well, we're still going to open it. I would expect for some sort of action to be taken away from that. I would expect for absolute refusal. Nope, the ride cannot run. It cannot be operated in this case to any degree. Lock it out. Put your own lock on there. Say, you can't operate this ride. I won't let it operate. And then know, if you're a mechanic, know where in the chain you rest. Because you want to know that if you say, if your lead says, we want to open this ride, then you need to go to the supervisor and say, someone's going to get hurt if we open this ride. We can't open this ride. And if the supervisor says, it's fine, go to the manager. If the manager says it's fine, go to the director. If the director says it's fine, go to engineering. If engineering says it's fine, if there's that many people in agreement that it's fine, honestly, it's probably fine. There are plenty of times mechanics just don't understand that the what may seem like a big problem is actually just a small problem. But if you have a problem that's quite legitimate, then if you keep elevating that problem higher and higher and higher up the chain, you will eventually find somebody that says, you're right, that's a problem. We can't operate like that. That's good. That's good. So I'll tell you one instance where I had two instances where one I just did kind of a reality check with myself, and the second one is I had to reach up higher than me. So the first one was just a reality check I did to myself. So I was out, went to a ride. It was a regatta, which if you've seen these rides, these regattas, it's a big spindle in the center. It's got a bunch of arms, and it just goes really fast in circles. Most of them just go up and down this little wavy track. Very standard. You find them at lots of carnivals and stuff like that. They called up and said, hey, there's this one tub that's making a weird noise. And it's like, okay, so I went out and checked it. And I went down and I looked at the arm connecting it. There was nothing wrong with the arm. There's nothing wrong with the wheel. There was nothing wrong, but I'm just like, yeah, I couldn't really find anything wrong with it, but it was making a weird noise. And I didn't know why. But I mean, I looked at the wheel assemblies, looked at everything that was rotating and moving, and I couldn't figure out what the problem was. Part of me just said, tag it out. And the other part of me is like, it's fine. I thoroughly inspected it. I could not find any problem with it. It could just be some grease or something like that. So those two kind of did it out in my head there. And I was just like, oh, let's run some more cycles. I'll check it again. And then we'll open it back up. On the last cycle, I was getting ready to call it up. And I said, in my head, I said, well, if my kids were standing in line waiting for this ride, which they did like to go on that ride, if my kids were standing here waiting in line for this ride, I would tell them, just don't go on that tub. And that was it. That set it off in my head. I was like, oh, that was my own reality check. I'd step back and say, I can't open that tub back up because there was something odd about it, and I don't know what it was, but I couldn't let people just go on to be if I couldn't put my own family in that one right there, right? That's the reality check. If you can't put your own family in that equipment, then it shouldn't be running in the first place. So we went ahead and tagged that one tub out, and then it went on. I believe it was something minor. It was just something like it was dried pivot bearing or something like that, and we ended up fixing it the next day. Put some extra TLC into it for the PM, and I believe that fixed it up. So it was nothing major, but it was just that reality check. The second one was on a major roller coaster. We had the ride. It had a DC motor at the top of the lift hill, and it has a motor brake on it. So when the motor is not being told to run, the brake turns on and it just holds the motor, holds everything. That theoretically acts as one of the anti-rollback devices. Even though the train's got plenty of anti-rollback devices on it, the chain not moving backwards acts as another one. In case all three anti-rollbacks failed, as long as you had two chain dogs hooked in there, even just one chain dog hooked in there, the ride would not roll backwards. So one day the brake failed completely. The coil burnt out and it smoked the brake. Like we couldn't open it. My boss wanted me to override the brake and just open it, force it open, and let it stay open. So I didn't think that was the right answer, but he didn't see a problem with it. I believe I went to my director at that point in time, and the director, not too sure of the subject, he relied on the manager. He said, well, the manager says it's okay, it's okay. I didn't like that answer either. So I went to corporate engineering, because we all have their phone numbers and we text message and everything. And I didn't call them up saying, this is what's happening, it's not safe, we can't open this ride. I just wanted someone other than me to say yes or no. So I called up the engineer and I said, hey, we did this, we overrode the brake, so the lift motor itself doesn't have a brake, but we have all three anti-rollbacks on the train in good working condition. We've actually done a bunch of starting and stopping on it. We've had no problems or anything else. And the engineer said, absolutely no way. There's no way that ride can operate. And we even tried to not argue, but okay, well, what about if we took one train off the track? So there was only one train in operation. It couldn't roll backwards into anything. Still said, nope, that ride is down until that brake is replaced. And that was the final answer. It's like, okay. But I had to elevate it 2 times above me to get that decision made. These things, I know for a lot of people watching these videos, it's like, well, I don't understand why something like that would happen. Mechanics in general, especially for amusement rides, are under an extreme amount of pressure to get the rides open. Everyone walks this very fine line between opening up a safe piece of equipment and opening up something that's dangerous. It's a very fine line right there, and the thing is that the reason why it's so fine is because aside from the manufacturer of the ride, no one really truly knows the full implication of whatever the thing you're looking at being wrong, right? Nobody knows that. Let's look at the reason why a lot of people are on this channel now, right? Let's look at Carowinds and the infamous track breaker ride that they got out there, the Fury 325 that snaps supports left and right. I know someone from Carowinds probably going like, "Oh my gosh, just leave that alone, please." So, right, we never really found out what happened with that, and say, well, B&M came in, made a new support. They got the support backed up and running. Cool, great. I do believe that was simply just, I believe that structure was cracked for a while, and they were probably monitoring it. And now you're allowed to monitor stuff. You're allowed to say, hey, I found a crack in this, and then typically cracks have to go up to engineering. Engineering hates the word crack, by the way, so if you want to refer to that with engineering, always say indication. Found an indication on this pillar. It's right here. Here's some pictures of where it is. Here's an aerial shot with the pillar circled. Here's a really crude drawing that I made on a piece of paper, and I circled the indication right there. Remember that? Yeah, I do. So we've done all this, and then we say, hey, what do we do with this? Do we need to shut it down right away? And then a lot of times engineering will say, well, when did you notice this crack? Well, we noticed it today. It's like, do you think that just happened today? It's like, no, it's probably been there for a while. It's probably been there for a couple days, 3, 4, 5 days. And they go, okay. So a lot of times what they say is go out to the indication and mark the edges of it. You can actually physically mark it with a Sharpie, or you could just take a tape measure and string it across there and measure how wide it is. Then they say, run 20 cycles on it, go back and measure it again. Did it open at all? No. It's like, okay, well then write down that measurement, and then every day go out and measure it again. So is this the fix? Is this what we're doing? No. So the fix is that we're going to contact the manufacturer and get a weld procedure, and we're going to do this and that, but we're just going to keep the ride in operation, because if the crack does start propagating, growing, then the next day we'll see that the crack is growing, and then we can shut the equipment down. So I do believe that one out there at Carowinds, someone was probably watching that, or a lot of people were probably watching that. And then it just went a little bit, and then suddenly opened the rest of the way for whatever reason. Whoever said to watch that would be liable for any damages that might have happened after that, right? If we said, well, I'm just going to watch that crack indication, I'm just going to watch that indication myself and not tell anybody, then I would be held liable for that. If I told it to my supervisor and I'm like, hey, there's an indication, here's the pictures on it, we're going to watch it, and the supervisor said, yeah, that's what we want to do, now the supervisor and the mechanic are kind of held liable for that, because now they're both in agreement on it, so they're the two people that know about it. It's not until it goes up higher then you start getting more of the liability shrugged off on you. And when lawyers and stuff come into the courtroom, that's where they want to find the liability where it stopped. Because if there was an injury that happened with that Fury 325 crack, if there was something that someone got injured off of it, they would have gone to, well, the mechanic that signed it off knew about the crack, so did the supervisor, they knew about it, but they went all the way up and contacted the manufacturer, let's say. They contacted the manufacturer, and the manufacturer said, We have lots of, many years of doing these repairs, and we've never seen anything like that failure before. So we told them to go ahead and let it operate and just simply watch it on a daily or maybe twice a day basis. Went out there and spotted it and said if it was growing, not growing. Even manufacturers do stuff like that too, because every once in a while you come across something that doesn't quite hit the books the way it should. It causes the verbiage to change at that point. So the implications of all this is what? What's going to happen? What could happen? What could happen is that if you're held responsible for whatever might have been, you're going to take on all the consequences of it. Let's say, boil it down to the worst case scenario, right? Fatality. No one wants that. But if you did something that caused a fatality and nobody else above you knew about it or okayed it, you were going to take on all that liability and responsible. Ride mechanics, managers, directors, all those people at those high levels have gone to jail for doing things to rides because you have a lot of people riding on them. You have a lot. It's basically public endangerment at that point in time. So there has been a lot of people that have gone to jail over doing dumb things. Not so much in the permanent parks. This is mainly there's a lot of traveling stuff where this happens. But the point is that you can go, and if you do something and sign off something stupid, the court can find you that you did. There's a term that people love to use when stuff like this happens. Negligence. They could find that you were being negligent. And it's like, well, what'd you do? Well, I went to the ride and I signed it off. And then a person fell out of seat 15. Well, yeah, that's because the restraints cracked in half on seat 15. But you knew about that? Yeah, but I signed it off anyway. It's been cracked in half for a long time, so I continued signing it off. Did you tell anybody about seat 15? Nope, didn't tell anybody because it's fine. I've been doing this stuff for a long time. Seats 15's been fine. It's been fine. Yeah, but a person fell out and died. It's like, what are you going to do about it? Guess what? You're going to jail. That's what they're going to do about it. We can't open rides in these conditions. It's just, hate to beat a dead horse, but you can't do it. You can't put people's lives in harm's way. Things that make more news than just a ride breaking. You can take the same exact scenario and put it into airline inspection, right? If you were to have an airline that had a plane go down, crashed, killed, 183 people on board, 183 deaths, right? Go back. Mechanics that signed it off last, what was it? Well, there were metal shavings all over these actuator rods. So what'd you do about that? Well, we just cleaned the metal shavings off. Did you tell anybody about it? Oh yeah, we took some pictures. It's like, okay, where'd those pictures go? We gave it to our bosses, and what'd they say? They said it's probably nothing. It's like, okay, well, the people above are probably going to go to jail over that because they're the ones that took the liability at that point in time. Did they go back to the manufacturer and say, hey, we found these metal shavings. What do we do about this? Did they ground that aircraft? No, they just said it's probably fine. Sent it off. Now we have a big problem. Sorry for those who come in looking for a cheery, chipper video. It's all just sunshine and lollipops. But this is the darker side of what we're asked to do. We're asked to open up rides every day. We want to do so, and we want to make sure they're safe. But occasionally, there's a few bad eggs that get in there and do some bad things, typically. And it ends up making a bad situation even worse. And we have to go through all sorts of litigations, lawsuits, just everything that nobody wants to do. And at the end of the day, someone's probably going to go to jail for whatever happened. It's bad, but the fact that it happened in the first place is even worse. And we can't continue to do that. So anytime we find something like that, rules are made, laws are changed, things are done. It's one of the reasons right now, like people jumping in the infields. Well, that's one of the reasons why we have a lot of rides use big fences, 6-foot fences, all the way around the ride. It's like, well, then the mechanics or a plumber or welder went in there, got struck by a train. It's like, okay, then we changed the lock to a style that the mechanic or the plumber and welder don't have access to. All right, and then someone else jumped that all together, still got hit by a train. So we put up a second fence around it. It's like we have to try to make continual improvement on these things. And anytime we see a failure about to happen, we have to prevent the failure. But sometimes we can't see it because people are very strong-willed sometimes, and we can't get in people's ways because they can act faster than we can. Even if it was as simple as, hey, the train's coming, why don't you wait like 10 seconds and then do this? Can't be there all the time. Well, I think this video slid downhill long enough, so I'm going to call it. I'm Ryan the Ride Mechanic. Have a good evening, and remember, stay off the air gates. Bye.